Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on your time zone, or maybe it's even evening if you're across the pond. My name is John Brown. I'm the Technical Product Manager here at MobilizeNet. And we want to thank you for coming to our webinar that we're holding today jointly with Microsoft, specifically about moving some of these old Microsoft desktop applications to the web using Azure and some of their PaaS opportunities. We have a terrific guest speaker today who I'm really excited about. He's somebody that I've known for a few years, and I just think he's a real smart guy, and he's got a lot of interesting things to say. So I hope you're going to be as excited about it as I am. I want to invite you to put your questions into the chat. Depending on how many we get, we'll try and answer all of them. We're going to try and reserve the last half hour or so of this webinar just for Q&A. So feel free to ask any of us. We have some great people from Microsoft here. We've got our own engineering and executive team here, and we've also got our great guest speaker from King County, Washington, Steve Hurd. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Anand Mogi, who is a Senior Azure Solution Specialist from Microsoft.
Thank you, John, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone, based on wherever you're joining from. My name is Anand Moge, and I'm Cloud Solution Specialist at Microsoft in Application Development segment. So me and my team here in Microsoft, you can see our profile there. So we are a cloud solution specialist with focus on application development and DevOps. So we are actually, our charter is to kind of help modernize and innovate application portfolio on Azure for state and local government customer and some ISV partners. Our charter is also to help our customer and empower developers to work smarter, improve productivity of the organization by recommending some great migration, modernization, innovation strategy on Azure based on best of breed tools, platform, any language, any platform of their choosing. So MobilizeNet is one of our go-to partner in app modernization and app innovation space. They have some unique solutions developed, as well as some service offering to help guide our customer to meet their app modernization and innovation objectives. So I'm really looking forward to this session, and I hope everyone can take advantage of this. So on this slide, right, so I hope most of you are kind of familiar with Azure, but if you haven't looked at Azure for a month or so, you might be pleasantly surprised what you will see. So this is just a high level map of like class of service that we offer. We have about 200 plus services and capabilities. You will notice that we are extending to Edge, the ability to run application code in cloud, but also having it seamless, consistent way on the Edge is kind of informing our deep commitment and investment in Edge. So whether it is Azure Stack, Azure Sphere, all the way to like HoloLens to our mixed reality capabilities. So there are some powerful things in place here. And you will see that we also have dev tools, DevOps, core infrastructure and PaaS services that we offer, which is backed by decades of innovations and in the developer arena. So Microsoft has always kind of strived hard to make this life of our developers or customer developers easier to innovative product and services. So overall, I guess this will give you the scope of what Azure as a platform and service can do for you. And I think let's go to the next slide. So just want to give you a quick overview of like all the components in one slide. The presentation deck will be shared with you and you can review this in detail. But as you can see, like any language, any platform, any kind of capabilities that you have in mind, we have solution on Azure for that. So let's go to quickly a decision trees if you are starting your journey. So this is a quick decision tree to like choose any Azure Compute Service if you are trying to develop or migrate apps on Azure Cloud. So we offer like number of ways to host your application code. If your application consists of multiple workload, you have to evaluate each workload separately. Um, a complete solution may incorporate two or more compute services in that case. So just a quick explanation of some of the terms here. For example, lift and shift. This is a strategy for migrating workload to cloud without redesigning application or making code change. Also called rehosting. So that's the shortest way if you are trying to like quickly migrate and innovate and modernize. Um, Cloud Optimize is the strategy for migrating to cloud by refactoring application to take advantage of cloud native features and capabilities. So the output from this flow chart is kind of a starting point for you to consider, like, where you fit, what strategies is good for your portfolio. Then after you review this decision tree, you should perform more detailed evaluation of a particular services that you are going to choose and see if fit your need. So I think this will be probably a good kickstart of our conversation today. And with that, I would like to hand this over to Federico.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you very much for this introduction. We've been working with Microsoft for many years, and hopefully we can take advantage of the cloud together with our customers. Before continuing, I really wanted to set up the case for legacy transformations, and maybe provide a little bit of a framework to think about this type of transformations. Let's think about when you develop an application the first time, you have an initial implementation, and that application starts to provide some value to your customer. Then over time, you typically have a team maintaining that application, fixing bugs, adding new functionality, and that application continues to add value, and the value to the business actually increases over time. However, there is a point in time when that application, if you do not transform it, if you maintain it on the same technology stack where it was developed at the beginning, then you're in trouble, and you will not be able to find the developers. You will not be able to support the application anymore. And so if you don't do anything, the value of that application that has been increasing over its lifetime is actually going to start to decrease unless you do a transformation. So if you go to the next slide, it's very important to understand what is the cost of doing nothing with these applications. And again, the assumption is that the application that we're talking about, that we select, is an application that is actually adding value to your business. Of course, if it is something that is no longer useful, then this conversation is mute. But assuming this is an application that actually adds value to your business, then you have to be aware of the cost of doing nothing. Because whenever we think about an application, we always think about the cost of maintaining it, maybe the two developers that are devoted to that. However, there are many more things that people don't see. This is like an iceberg effect, right? So a little portion of the iceberg is at the top, but most of it is hidden, and especially the impact that an application may have on the business if it is built on top of obsolete technology, or potentially on top of unsupported technology that may produce lots of issues moving forward. Those things have to be taken into consideration. And then when you're transforming an application, it's also super important to understand what is the impact on the business. When we think about modernizing an application, transforming an application, we always think about, from an IT perspective, these are the costs. So if I have to modify this application, if I have to do lift and shift in the cloud, if I have to transform it as Mobilize does it, or rewrite it, what is the cost of development and maybe testing of that application? But you tend to forget what is the cost of actually deploying that application to the business. And again, it's another type of hidden cost. What is the retraining that you have to do for your users? What is the impact for potential mistakes and errors if you try to implement a new application in the business? So when you look at an application, we always like to use this framework to classify them and decide what you should do with a particular application. And we have two dimensions. One is technical quality, and the other one, which I think personally is the most important, is business value. So the first thing that you should be doing is have an inventory of all of the applications that you have in your system, and then classify them. And we want to suggest this framework. So let's look at this framework quickly. If you have an application that is non-critical, or maybe it's what I call a me too type of application, like I don't know, some simple accounting system or something like that, and that application is actually poorly written or written on an obsolete platform, then by all means, you should what we say, shut and replace, and really go with with an off-the-shelf package, and really try to eliminate that. I mean, your business should not really spend time on me too type of applications, especially if those applications are just they have a lot of technical debt. Of course, if they work, just leave them alone for now. But then when you move across the business value dimension, then you have a little bit more choices, right? And if the application is really poorly written and there is so much technical debt that you wouldn't even know how to start with a modernization, and it's still a mission critical application, and it is not something that you can buy off the shelf, then a rewrite is what's necessary. However, if this is a mission critical application or a very valuable application that you cannot buy off the shelf, and you think it's in a technical state where it makes sense to continue to evolve it, but maybe this application is just trapped on an old technology stack, that is when migration makes the most sense. And this is where we would like to focus today, on applications that are important to your organization and that are trapped on an old technology stack, but that are currently performing a valuable function, and they need to continue to be evolved. So the solution would be to migrate them. And with Mobilize, our approach is to automate as much as possible of that process. And then once they're on the new technology stack and you have the same functionality on the new technology stack, then you can continue to evolve that application and go back to the cycle that I was showing you at the beginning, where you have essentially a new, and the application as new again on the new technology stack, and then you continue to evolve it and continue to add new value moving forward. So if we switch to the next slide, this is where Mobilize works. I mean, we specialize in what I like to call the 90s legacy. And we have a portfolio of application migration products that is available, starting from VB6, first version .NET, C# and VB.NET, Power Builder, Silverlight, which by the way is also going out of support very soon. Access forms, that we've seen access forms growing a lot inside corporations, that were very easy to build, and some of them became real critical inside some organizations. Of course, Fox Pro, Delphi, ASP.NET Web Forms, that nowadays you want to also move them forward. And then, of course, classic ASP. And our general target platform is what we call a web solution. So we want to take these desktop architected applications and move them to the cloud. As Anand was saying at the beginning, you could do lift and shift, which is essentially no code changes. Or if you have an application that is written on one of these old technologies on a desktop architecture, you can use mobilize.net technology to really take them to the cloud and have them become what I like to call first-class citizens in the cloud. You have an application that is fully architected for the Azure cloud environment, and that has all of the same functionality as before, and that is ready for you to continue to develop on top of it. At Mobilize, we have done this for many years, and we have customers all around the world, and we partner with some of the largest organizations in the world who also use our technology to execute projects on their own, or we can help customers directly. as we've done with King County, as we will see later on when Steve Hurd is gonna come and describe their experience with us and their experience at how to approach this problem at King County in Washington. So now I would like to ask Will for a couple of demos so that you can really see this concept of taking an application that is written on an old technology stack, actually trapped on an old technology stack, and how to mostly automatically move it to the new platform. Will?
Thank you, Federico.
Uh,
Okay, let me see if I connect to this environment where I have this demo. This is going to be very quick, and it just showcases two of our tools, or the results of our tools. The first one is actually a very standard desktop application. In this particular case, this is a Visual Basic 6 application, and this is the migrated version that we took to the web, and it's hosted on Azure, right? You can see that the interface of the application is pretty similar, right? Which is one of the advantages of the whole process, right? This is, again, mostly automated. There will always be certain things that will need to be made or done in a manual way, right? In the end, if you need to access the registry or need to access the file system on desktop application, when you take that to the web, that is really not possible in the exact same way. So there will still be some work. But the beauty of this is that most of these things are automatically converted, and you will get an application that will run on any browser. In this case, this is hosted on Azure already, right? This is pointing to a secure database, and you get things like multiple screens that you can load there. You can basically get the same UI, which is a big advantage when you have especially a large group of users, right? You don't have to retrain them. In the end, yes, the application looks slightly different, but anybody who knows how to use the original application will be able to do the same on the target application, right? This one in particular is using Angular, and it's using ASP.NET Core on the server side. Now, the second sample here, which is from an Access application, right? This is very typical of Federico was saying. Lots of people started with a small application in Access, basically a couple of forms, and it kept growing and growing to the point where, I mean, people have millions of lines of code. Like literally last week, I was talking to a client who has 2.1 million lines of code in Access applications, right? And so all of these components are also converted with our tools, right? And in this case, I have here the development environment where all this code was generated as a standard ASP.NET Core application with Angular. And if I execute this, it's going to take a couple of seconds to load the migrated application, but it's going to be something very similar to what we originally had, right? And if we open the windows side by side, you will be able to see basically the same components. They will look slightly different, but again, any existing user of the application will be able to continue using the same thing. And now you will be able to deploy it on the cloud. You will be able to deploy it in a single server, right? You don't have to go to hundreds of computers to deploy the application, right? And basically you get all the benefits of being on the cloud while having an application that is native to that target platform. Okay.
Thank you, Will. And you touched on a couple of very important points. First of all, these applications, when it gets automatically converted, it looks the same. That doesn't mean that it has to continue to look the same. It's just a first step where you achieve functional equivalence, which is super important, especially as you said, when there is a large number of users. And in our philosophy, that is the first step. I mean, you first change the technology stack, and then you continue to evolve the application, right? That is the step that we like to follow. And also, and again, I always like to tell some anecdotes. And I was working with a large telecommunication company years ago, and they told me, well, this application is used by 3,000 users, even if I could find another application that does the same thing, it's not going to do it in the same way. And think about it, my training class for a user to use this application is 3 weeks. So if I have to retrain all of my user base at 3 weeks each, I have 9,000 weeks of downtime that will pay for the migration, to achieve functional equivalence and continue to use the same application on the new technology stack. Because I mean, their problem was the obsolete, not supported technology stack. It was not the functionality of the application. But imagine that. And going back to my argument about the iceberg at the beginning, 9,000 man weeks of downtime typically do not go on the IT budget, but they are, material to the company budget. So, this is our approach. This is how we do it for this. And maybe you can touch base a little bit just on the target architecture going from desktop to the web, and then we ask Steve to tell us his experience at King County.
Yes, and as Federico was saying, we generate something that's basically cloud native, right? We focus the process on generating something that's that not only looks the same or looks similar, but also it's something that can be maintained by anybody who's familiar with the target environment, right? And so what we do is we split the business logic and the UI. The UI will stay on the client side. That will be HTML5 with a set of controls that will provide the functionality in the application for things like grids and tree views and all of the rich user experience that you are used to on a desktop application, right? In this case, we are using Kendo for that. And then on the server side, we will have an ASP.NET Core, and all of the business logic will be C#, right? And all of the communication basically will be JSON via our web API, right? And that can be hosted on Azure. It can be hosted on internal servers if for some reason you don't want all of these to be on the public cloud, right? So it's basically a very modern technology stack, right?
Thank you, Will. So without further delay, I would like to go to the main part of the presentation where Stephen Hurd, the CTO of King County, Washington, is going to tell us about his experience with application modernization. Thank you, Steve, and welcome to the webinar.
All right. Thanks, Federico. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning, afternoon, everyone, or evening, depending on your location. Yeah, so I'm the CTO at King County. Will, are you driving the deck?
I am, yes.
I'll have you go ahead and hit the next slide, the details of my profile. Right, so maybe go back one. Just for context, for those of you who don't know, King County is a local government jurisdiction responsible for a significant chunk of the central Puget Sound area. So that's a picture of Seattle with Mount Rainier in the background, right? So Seattle, East Side, locations you'll recognize: Redmond, Bellevue, home to Starbucks, Costco, Amazon, Microsoft, a whole host of other companies and names, right? So we're incredibly blessed to live in the kind of cradle of technology in many cases, right between Microsoft and AWS. And next slide, please, Will. King County, I'm plus or minus here on these numbers, pending the results of the latest census, but we're somewhere in the neighborhood of the 12th largest county in the United States based on population. King County also operates one of the largest, the 7th largest transit agency in the US. And that's in some ways unique for a county government to also run a public transit agency as well, which contributes to our size in many cases. 14,500 employees. The county manages over 80 distinct lines of business, right? Airport, marine transportation, jails, public health, parks, natural resources, solid waste, road services. I kind of describe us as almost being like GE. We do a lot of different things and have a lot of different lines of business. Our IT department, which we call KCIT, is about 450 people. And we primarily service what's known as the executive branch of government. There are some separately electeds that have their own IT, but we're responsible for providing core essential services for the entire enterprise, and then within the executive branch, we provide a number of value-added services as well. Ready for the next one. So we're going to hit a couple of things here. I want to talk a little bit about our technology strategy journey, our approach to application portfolio management and application modernization. I want to spend the bulk of the time, though, kind of walking you through an example, a compare and contrast of a custom development project that we did to migrate and modernize an application versus the experiences that we've had with Mobilize in their automation product space, and take a look at the differences there and what some of the pros and cons from our experience were. And then I've got a few key takeaways at the end. All right, so this is a look back into 2013 when we developed the technology modernization strategic vision in a number of different technology domains, of course. Interesting also to note that about this time, King County IT had centralized from being distributed across all those different lines of business to being a central service-based agency. And so there's a big focus, because we had come from these kind of disparate, different lines of business, different technology practices in driving modernization and standardization. So you'll see if you look down at the platform space on the bottom, in 2013, we were kind of all in on this vision of moving everything to the cloud. You know, we've since, and I think, you know, many people have been on this journey as well, of being all in the cloud, and then having to reel that back a little bit as we got some cycles in that space and understood what it was good for and what it wasn't good for. In the application space, what you see here pretty much has held over time, right? We wanted to move away from client-server, desktop-based applications, mainframe applications, into more browser-based, multi-form factor, not dependent on the corporate network application experiences for our customers. You know, leveraging things like service-oriented architectures, repeatable processes, things like SDLC and enterprise architecture to help drive our vision in the application space forward. And what comes with that is, you know, what you see above, layering in security in the network space, moving from, you know, hardwired connections to being able to leverage wireless, which enables a workstation strategy of moving from, you know, big desktop machines to laptops that we can take anywhere. In fact, I've argued in other presentations that, and I wasn't really part of, I was part of a bit of this strategic piece, but this vision in 2013 set us up to like almost seamlessly transition from on-premise to telework when the pandemic hit. We were really well prepared to manage that transition almost overnight. So a little nod to some of the folks that came before me, and an acknowledgement of the real value of having long-term strategic vision in the technology space in local government to help frame where you want to go. Even if, you know, like in the platform space, we had to adjust our expectations and our planning. It was super important for us in 2013 to have a vision about where we wanted to be, and then be executing against that to be in a position to seamlessly transition away from on-prem work to remote work. So we'll go to the next slide here. This is just a quick kind of shout out to what we were looking to do in the application space. So this is also pulled from that 2013 timeframe, right? Enabling flexibility, timely delivery, dependability, right? And so continuously evolving what our technology stacks, what our standards and processes look like in that space. So technology modernization featured really prominently in the mid-2010s for us, both as we consolidated into a central organization and as we began to try to make sense of our application portfolios, which we'll take a kind of snapshot look at on the next slide. So when we began to kind of collect data and information about what we had, as we came together and centralized, this is what we discovered. Collectively, we had over 1,200 applications that we could track in our portfolio. 55 different programming languages, 22 different database platforms. We had mainframe, server client, WinForms, web forms, we had the whole spectrum of stuff, right, that you would expect to see. Very expensive to support and maintain, very limiting in terms of what it enabled us to be able to move into in terms of enabling business capability that didn't exist. Landlocked applications. So that's a reference back to not being able to get work done from an end user standpoint without being on the corporate network or VPN'd in. And we found we had a lot of the same or similar business capability implemented on different platforms in different languages, essentially doing the same thing. So there are huge opportunities for us to begin to consolidate and rationalize the application inventory to get us to where we wanted to go. And John, remind me at the end to tell you what that number is today, but I'm not going to say just yet. Let's take a look at the next slide. So once we developed an inventory, and that's no small effort, right? It took us, I think, over a year to collect all that application inventory data. We set out to essentially build a application rationalization model, or essentially build out a disposition model, right? An approach for each application. And we applied the time model, that tolerate, invest, migrate, and eliminate space. In many ways, asking developers to do this work, you wind up with what you see here, and probably another page of attributes and decision points that we were tracking. There's a lot of stuff here, but essentially what you saw on some of the slides from Federico is what we were driving towards, right? Assessing business value and technology fit, right? Assessing against, is it meeting the needs of the business? And from an IT quality standpoint, where does it sit? And then you'll see the little matrix over there in the conditions and conclusions that gave us some directionality around whether we were going to tolerate something, invest in it, migrate it, or eliminate it. So on the left, you'll see this is the classic kind of time matrix and this isn't the one that we developed, but ours looked very similar to this. Business fitness versus technical fitness. What we actually wound up aligning towards or snapping towards as part of our work was something more like what you see on the right. So in general, you're not going to see it. You don't see it on the Gartner example on the left. You're not going to see a lot of really high technical fitness with low business value. At least we didn't, and I wouldn't probably expect that most organizations would. The things that from a technology health standpoint are going to be really high fitness and aligned to your strategy and standards are going to be things that you're developing more recently, and they ought to, I would hope, have really high business value. So we don't see, I actually had something in there that said like sunset, but as I thought about it, we don't really have anything that fits into that space, or we couldn't identify a whole lot that fit into that high technology fit but low business value. So, but where we want to be spending our time and being aggressive is where we're in the top right and bottom left. Aggressive in eliminating things that are low, right? Low tech value, low business value. Finding opportunities to invest in high business value opportunities, right? In a way that aligns with our technology roadmap. And as Federico said, modernizing or dealing with the things that are high business value, but low fit from a tech standpoint. There's kind of a path through the middle in that sustained space that you don't have to deal with right away. At least we felt we didn't have to deal with right away. We could hold on many of those things. And the boxes maybe don't align perfectly to how we approach this, but kind of give you a sense of the flavor of our approach. And that it's really that high business value, low tech fit where we're focusing this conversation. So let's take a look at the next slide. So Federico talked about this, and there's tons of all you have to do is Google application modernization or go to Gartner, and you're going to find all kinds of different options. We've done all of these in one form or another. Different orgs will use different terms to talk about these things, but rehosting, lifting and shifting, replatforming, refactoring, rebuilding, replacing, rewriting, restructuring. It's really about having sort of a standards-based approach to how you want to deal with things, and also understanding how the decisions you make here translate down the line. Because as Federico said, there's really no free lunch in how you deal with applications in this modernization space, right? There's a cost, and sometimes incredibly significant cost, to not do anything. So it's important for us to make a decision from a modernization and application rationalization standpoint about those applications, and at least set them on a path for resolution at some point. And frankly, we're still dealing with that. That process began in about 2015, and is still occurring for us. We're still kind of tackling, from an application rationalization modernization standpoint, weaknesses in the portfolio. This is actually essentially another takeaway from that 2013 strategy. And this was our check down list as we either replaced or introduced new solutions into the environment in terms of what our preferences were for the types of technology or development opportunities we were looking for. So whenever a new request came in, or a request to modernize something, we would scan the market and say, can we do this on a platform, right? For us, that CRM platform was Dynamics, Microsoft Dynamics. We had other customer instances that were using Salesforce. Is there a SaaS solution in this space, right? Or is there a COTS solution? Custom developed software for us, as you can see, and this is in order of preference, was at the bottom. So we recognized, our CIO at the time, I think, was really smartly recognized that for us, custom development long-term was not where we wanted to be at as option one. So we needed to shift our thinking and our mindset away from custom development as the go-to for application modernization. Okay, so now I want to talk about an example. And so I've known John and Will. We've worked together on and off, and other folks from Mobilize for some time. I think probably beginning around that 2013, 2014 timeframe. And we had a lot of interesting conversations back in the day. One of them was around this business space for us, which is the King County Metro. So I mentioned that they're one of the largest public transit operators in the US. They also operate the largest van pool rideshare programs in the US. And so this is the example that I want to talk about. Will, if you go to the next slide. So for those of you who don't know, van pool is like this program where essentially the van pool program has about 1,800 vehicles that they purchase, and they pull in groups, often through employers who subsidize the cost of the service. And basically we're having people who are like self-identifying and self-organizing to drive themselves as part of a daily commute in a van pool. They take ownership of that vehicle, loosely called ownership, right? They ensure it gets fueled, maintained, serviced. The van pool itself kind of manages itself, but there's a whole, as you can imagine, infrastructure, IT infrastructure around the management of that information, right? So if you go to the next slide, it talks a little bit about what that does. Or maybe it was the previous slide, but essentially there's accounting, bookkeeping, document management, payment management, some accounting practices. All that was stood up over time, probably by one or two in-house developers, custom built in 1995 using VB6. There's another side application that came along known as VanShare that was implemented in 2004 using Visual Basic for applications. I think that's code for Microsoft Access, but I'm not sure. So this obviously got flagged on our portfolio rationalization efforts as a high-risk application. Also provided a tremendous amount of business value. And is in a kind of product niche that was not easily serviced, or solution sets were not easily identifiable in the marketplace. So, and I actually recall, like, why don't we just do QuickBooks, right? Well, there were a lot of stuff that QuickBooks couldn't do at the time that they needed to do, and we didn't want to cobble together kind of a Frankenstein solution. They liked the way it worked. They knew how it worked. It met their needs, but the technology fit wasn't there, and it introduced a lot of risk. It was tremendously expensive for us to support. So about 40,000 lines of VB6 code. I had a SQL Server backend, but at one time had been a Microsoft Access backend that had been migrated to SQL Server. So we spun up a modernization project, right, in partnership with the business. The primary benefit identified is maintaining level of service by replacing or upgrading older technology. This obviously fits that criteria, right? And reducing the risk of technical debt, essentially. Now, if we were in person, I might have a little contest here. And because I had been talking with Mobilize for some time about the benefits of their service and automated migration and the AI ML components of it, the ability of them to map, almost identical, as you saw in Will's demo, almost identical kind of user experience, right? User interaction to the original applications. We had interesting conversations and a lot of kind of great back and forth. And so what I decided to do was actually do a compare and contrast. We had been using Mobilize in some cases to do automated migrations, right? And smaller scales for sure. And this was the organization made a decision to approach this with custom development. And so what I'm going to show you probably isn't surprising, but it's always very interesting to me. So, Will, if you just hit the button there. Okay, so to protect the innocent or the not so innocent, I'm not actually putting in the exact dollar amounts in time, right? I will tell you that orange represents our initial estimate to do this work. So remember, we had 40,000 lines of VB6 code, and the goal is really to move that to the web, right? To get it standardized in our current kind of architecture stack. The original estimate was 18 months and $325,000. Yeah, so pretty soon we figure out that we were way, way off on that, and we need to extend the project by another 12 months. And the budget now increases to close to $550,000. Now, if you've got a robust project governance in place in your organization, that's going to start setting off some alarm bells, right? So we were off by almost the amount of the original estimate, both in terms of time and in dollars. So at that point, the project had been re-estimated. It got put on pause because we had some serious concerns about whether or not we could trust the new estimate and whether or not we could deliver the expected benefits. Go ahead and click the button, Will. This is where the documented project ended in terms of documented costs and time. Now, the time is actually what it took. It took about 42 months, so 3.5 years from start to finish. That includes a 6-month pause to really reset the project and ensure that we actually had a high degree of confidence that we could finish it at that $725,000 budget target. I will tell you unofficially that the out-the-door costs, the down-the-road costs on this project were probably closer to $800,000 because as a result of a lack of reliable estimation and our inability to meet two key project dimensions, schedule and budget, IT wound up having to eat some of the costs of this implementation. And that's never a great place to be in. I think it was in some ways inevitable, probably, in how this project was approached. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the takeaways in a moment. But this is where we wound up, right? Taking 40,000 lines of VB6 code with the intent of really just preserving the capability and getting it into a web-based, modern tech platform, not even taking it to the cloud. Escalated super fast and went from something that at the onset, as you'll see if you click the next button, I'll circle back to that thought in just a second. So what you see on the right is where I believe this project would have landed had we used Mobilize. It would have come right under our capital kind of line of demarcation. $250,000 is sort of the line in the sand where we would consider something to be a capital investment. We think we could have done this under that line, and we would have been able to meet probably about the 18-month timeframe, which was our original estimate. Now, what we did do on the left, on the custom side, was all kinds of new feature development, right? Solving for things that customer loved if it would work just slightly differently, right? If we could just tweak this thing over here or implement something, a new workflow, a new form, or change a form. That contributed, that kind of project scope creep contributed to a little bit of the bloat that you see on the left. But most of it is just due, I think, primarily, even with a software engineering shop that's got about 40 people in it, we don't really approach or do a lot of large custom development projects. A lot of what we do is integration work and kind of value-added work to tie systems together and projects of opportunity, but we don't often do things of this size. So it's in many ways not surprising that it wound up at this point. I think we were overly ambitious with our original estimates, in part because we didn't really understand the whole scope of the project. One of the great things about our experience with Mobilize on the automated side, and maybe if you go to the next slide, and we might come back to this, Will, is kind of takeaway number 3, right? This, and I think Federico talked about this a little bit as well, is when you approach this as an automated, kind of transformation space, you take a lot of that project creep off the table, right? You're really going like for like and getting yourself the current functionality, often the current screen interactions, as Will showed you, but you're not focused on changing the functionality and the capability that application delivers. You're really getting it onto a modern platform with the idea that you can always circle back after that's done. And because it's modern, because it's in a technology stack that your dev teams understand, you can extend and enhance after that's done. But the work we've done with Mobilize in the automated space really accelerates our ability to get work done in this modernization way, in a way that meets customer needs, right? Keeps them whole from a functionality standpoint, is super cost effective, and sets us up to be able to extend after the fact, as opposed to kind of rolling that into a big scope feature creep project bloat that we quickly lose control of if we're not super disciplined. So quickly, a couple of other takeaways I just wanted to highlight. So, legacy code, and I think we've talked about this a couple of other spaces. Legacy code is a burden. It not only does it perpetuate risk and continues to introduce risk, but it blocks what we kind of loosely call digital transformation. Lifting and shifting to the cloud, if you're just picking up workloads and moving them to the cloud, doesn't really solve that problem. It's just really shifting it someplace else. And so there are opportunities in the lift and shift space, but if you have technical debt, and you're not solving for it at the same time, just picking up things and moving them to someplace else doesn't get you where you want to go. Number 2, so we saw the list of technologies that Mobilize can help you with in this space. Classic ASP, for us, Classic ASP, Power Builder, Access, Visual Basic, and Formix, VB.NET are the new mainframe. It's incredibly hard to find developers who want to work with these technologies anymore. It's even harder to get them to come and work in the local government space. So often what we wind up doing is hiring consultants to help us. And the opportunity cost of that, just from a dollar standpoint, means we're paying a lot more money to generate a similar outcome as our internal staff, because we just don't have people that want to work and frankly, that can work in these technologies anymore. And then finally, the big thing for us, and if you think back to that slide where we kind of documented how that schedule and cost slipped so dramatically, is the opportunity cost of migrating legacy code with custom development is super high. And that's been our experience. Because I think it's really true, at least at King County, and I suspect in other local government spaces, custom development is the single most expensive thing that we do, right? If you do it right and you want to do it well, it's not just developers, it's analysts, it's QA, it's a whole team of folks that you've got to bring together, and they've got to execute at a high level to get things done reliably and cost effectively. We want to be reserving that capability for things that matter, to leverage those folks on projects and efforts that help our business customers differentiate themselves where they can't find products in the marketplace to help them achieve their missions. Really engaging on high value projects that move local government forward and into kind of a more digital footprint in terms of engaging with our staff, with internal employees, but also with the public, right? That's a very rich environment of opportunities for our internal staff to be focused on developing towards, rather than dealing with the burden of what's been built in the past. So for us, these are the big takeaways of how we kind of compare and contrast and make decisions about how to approach some of our modernization challenges. Automated code migrations has a huge role to play in our toolbox in terms of how we want to approach things, right? We're also doing all of the other stuff as well, but I think having a well-rounded strategy for how you want to deal with that migration quadrant, that modernization quadrant, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You've got to bring a variety of strategies and partnerships and relationships, like Mobilize, like with Microsoft, like with AWS, and there are plenty of others out there that can help migrate that legacy code so that your teams can focus on what really matters for the business. So thanks for listening. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you all. And I think I'll hand it back to John at this point.
Thank you, Steve. That was terrific. And I really appreciate you being here. And I hope I can hold on to you for just a little bit longer, because I'd like to open this up to Q&A. And we don't have any queued up right at the moment. We had a little bit of a interesting turf war between the AWS and Microsoft guys, which is kind of fun to watch. And I think you guys should go get a room somewhere and duke it out. But maybe I can prime the pump a little bit. One of the things that I think might be interesting to people, I know it is to me, from an organizational standpoint, Steve, when you were going through this back in 2013, 2015, and sort of putting the beginnings in place to look, we need to get off of this legacy stuff. Can you talk a little bit about what you went through convincing senior management and the people that basically, hold the purse strings and make the top level decisions before you? I know this was before you were the CTO. What was that like? What do you think worked? What, if you had to do it over again, is there anything you'd change?
Yeah. I mean, how much time do we have? That's a really interesting conversation. So we've gone on a really long journey around IT service management and how we account for support and enhancement the application portfolio, conversations with customers. So I'll say this, as we kind of got a handle on what was out there, right, from an app solution standpoint, that enabled us to drive conversations around prioritization with customers and value with customers. Now, I would say, as we centralized, we went from being really super closely connected to our business partners because we were part of the business as IT, to being centralized. And that drove some complications in those conversations because in many cases, IT was the expert in the business about how the business was actually operating through IT. So there was also a kind of an ownership transformation that needed to occur at the same time on the business side, right? Getting really active about managing their technology investments, understanding what they had, what the risks and priorities should be. I will say that we went pretty quickly from just articulating sort of a labor unit cost in the development space to then estimating, and we do 2-year budget cycles here. So about 2016, we got to a point where we felt pretty confident based on our time metrics, our time reporting, that we could estimate over the course of a biennium how much time we needed to spend on each application to sustain it. And so we pretty well, relatively quickly transitioned into a sort of base cost to sustain an application, and then put enhancement money kind of at the discretion of the business. So, and that was, I'm not sure how successful that was, because the business, if you're not disciplined on the IT side about managing the demand, business often doesn't understand the difference. It's kind of a nuanced conversation, the difference between sustainment and enhancement. Where we've finally gotten to now is essentially creating levels or tiers of support, and essentially making recommendations. So that looks like platinum, gold, silver, bronze, where bronze is in that on its way out space, right? And the customer has to make a decision, and we work with them in this, has to make a decision about where they want to go with that application, but they know that we can no longer support it beyond a certain point in time. All the way up to platinum, where we have teams of people supporting mission critical applications, right? Often those are vendor applications that are line of business, things like collections of asset management, work order systems, and things like that. So it's kind of been a journey, and we're still trying to find the right way to interact with the business around this. But where we're at now is not like an hour, we're going to spend this many hours on it, this month or this year, but more like you're going to pay in kind of a service-oriented way, almost like a kind of SaaS subscription way, for us to keep this application supported and operable and on a modern platform, right? So we're not waiting 5 years and scrambling to get off of Server 2008 R2. So that's just the cost of keeping the thing up and running and, on a Rev -1 platform. All the enhancement work that needs to get done, that comes out of a separate conversation, and the business has to fund that explicitly and discreetly.
I was muted. Hey, thanks. That's very interesting. I just want to invite everybody, you can write your questions in. Maybe Steve answered them all already. I do want to bring up one other point, or ask you probe one other point, Steve, because I know you're, I looked at your bio, and you go all the way back to Wizards of the Coast as a developer, right?
Yeah.
That's not something, that's something to be proud of. That was a kind of a cool Microsoft sort of Nirvana level, cultural shift, I think, with Magic.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really, for those of you who are old enough to remember when Pokemon cards, trading cards were a big deal, that was a great kind of, for me, like really formative experience and I started out supporting their ERP system, which at the time was Solomon, I think it was called Solomon 4. And it was designed for Windows for workgroups. This was in the late 90s or mid 90s. And Wizards of the Coast went from running like $50 million, a $50 million business into a $500 million business almost overnight. And we had a team of people that kept that Solomon 4 installation running through all of that. And it's pretty crazy, but also pretty cool time to be there. Yeah.
Yeah. Kirk is asking if Wizards of the Coast had a WPF client.
Yes, I believe they did. I want to say this is about the time I was leaving, but they were building. I'm not sure if it was Magic the Gathering Online or if it was another product, but I believe that they were using WPF either for that or they were using it for their back end card design and management system. I think it might have been the latter, but yeah.
Interesting. So we do have a couple of questions, but before we get to those, the one I wanted to tee up was, since you've had experience both in the senior management side of King County IT, but also down in the trenches, hacking code at Wizards, do you think that there's any real difference between the way that the King County experience with the Vanpool app didn't do a great job of sort of estimating, cost and time versus like what your experience in a more commercial development shop? Are those about the same? Are they really different? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a level of sameness or a degree of sameness. I would say, for the most part, based on my experience in the local government space, we're often sort of charged or primed to be proficient across a number of different disciplines, right? So when I came to the county from Wizards, you had a lot of like single-threaded developers. So that VIS system was probably the result, and systems like it were the result of a developer working for years, right, embedded with the business, developing something over time. They were writing, they were developing the requirements, they were doing the user testing, they were writing the code, they were designing the forms. We have since kind of transitioned into a kind of multidisciplinary approach where we have, we're actually moving now to product teams. But the difference for me when I left Wizards and came to the county was Wizards was built more like what I would call like a studio model, where you had designers who were designing art assets and working in the same tooling with developers. So there's kind of a separation of concerns, and you had developers focused on, specifically on the database side or specifically on the back end or the presentation layer. It was much more. It felt a little like, I don't mean this to like talk trash about my teams, but it felt like this sort of more pro development approach, because it inevitably it had to be. I mean, they were making significant investments, millions and millions of dollars to develop commercial software implementations. The county is different. You're primarily supporting lines of business and internal operations, and you could get away with having a developer embed for a year or 2 years and develop something that was good enough and solve the problem. The problem was long term, that developer needed to stay there because they were the only one that understood it, right? The software didn't scale. They weren't getting kind of the care and feeding from a development and career development skill set standpoint to be able to anticipate the future, right? So we didn't have, because we were distributed, we didn't really have an overarching view of where we wanted to go. And so you're just missing a lot in those years. And I came to the county in 2007. There just wasn't kind of that holistic vision of understanding where we were and where we wanted to go. And we didn't really get to that point until 2012, kind of 2013. That, for me, that was the big difference, is just kind of that experience standpoint and where the focus was. And also, frankly, how quickly sometimes in the private sector you can spin up a team of really highly capable folks. It takes a little longer to get to that point in the private sector or in the public sector.
Thanks. couple of questions for Federico here. Federico, can we improve the testability of the app with automated transformation?
Well, in principle, the projects that we execute are what we call functional equivalents. So we take an application, some set of functionality that is on an old technology stack, and we put it in a new technology stack. But then, how do you verify that the converted application actually behaves in the same way as the old one? You have to run a set of test cases. So I always call it like a side effect of the migration is that you are going to build a regression suite if you didn't have one, right? And if you had one, that was non-automated, like most of them are, if you build this software in the 90s, then you can take the opportunity to actually build an automated regression suite during the migration project. And so at the end, you have not only have an application that is on the new technology, but you also have a regression suite that is going to help you take this application to the next level or add new functionality to the next level. So yes, I mean, when you do a migration, you always also improve the ability to test the application and automatically moving forward.
Yeah, whether you like it or not, you got to have tests, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's been true for us. I think when we've engaged, not surprising, we have solo developers. They're not writing test cases, right? They know how their code works. If something happens, they can dive in, and so that is something that we have had to get. Fortunately, we have a QA department that can help us develop and business analyst, systems analyst capability that help us work with the customers at that point to start developing test cases. But that's also, when we receive that migrated code back, it comes well tested, and we understand that it's meeting the business needs and meeting those test cases. That's super important for us.
Absolutely.
We have another question. I think it can be a little harder to have a positive answer, and that is if you don't have the source code, you only have the compiled version. What can you do with that?
Well, I mean, sometimes we call ourselves software archaeologists because we really go and have to dig for the source code. I mean, if you really just have binaries and no way to get to source code, then the mobilize.net approach to this problem is not the right one for you. However, we've helped organization really dig for the source code. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years and I have lots of anecdotes. But I mean, at one time, one of our customers got one of their architects out of retirement so that he could come in and actually explain us how to compile a particular application, because it had not been compiled in like 7 or 8 years. And so he was able to rebuild, to rebuild the actual build environment, right? And then we could start from there. But if you have absolutely no way to get the source code, I mean, we really don't do disassembly or anything like that. I mean, we start from source code and then we transform that source code to the new technology platform.
Yeah, Kirk Davis is pointing out that you could use a tool to decompile or reverse engineer the .NET stuff back to C#. With a managed environment, there are some things you can do to get to something else, but you could also take the similar language and try and figure out stuff from that. But it's a hard problem, right?
Right.
Question.
And also, if you can decompile, part of a big important factor when you're doing a migration like this is that the generated code out of the automation has to be maintainable and understandable, right? So if you start from some decompiled code that has no comments, that the name of the variables are not there, et cetera, then the quality of the generated code is going to be poor, right? And so the purpose of I migrate so that I can continue to maintain my application is not going to be accomplished. And again, when you do an automatic migration, it is very important, to preserve the comments, to preserve the structure of the code, to preserve the variable name, so that if somebody understood the original code, they can look at the generated code and they can, pick it up very quickly. And I think that is important. Any other question?
Yeah. What are the factors that play into estimating the migration effort and timeline? Sandoval wants to know.
So, with our approach, which again is mostly automated, we try to improve our automation tools with every project. So we essentially get two inputs from our customers. We get the source code and we get a set of test cases in some format, right? Sometimes is just Word documents or videos or other things. And then based on that and based on what the actual target is, are they going to from desktop to desktop or desktop to cloud? And are they, what is the level of complexity of the user interface? Because I mean, sometimes you can have a very, very complex desktop UX that doesn't translate perfectly well to the cloud. Or sometimes you're using some features on the desktop, like, I don't know, the registry, right? I mean, if you're using the registry, when you're going to the cloud, you have to figure out another way of probably storing some configuration information for the original application. So depending on what can be automatically mapped between source and target platforms and what has to be adjusted by hand, that is the input to the estimations. But in general is related to the size of the application and a little bit about its complexity.
Okay. And Pascal would like to ask about Fox Pro. Do we only work with Visual Fox Pro? Do we work with the old Fox Pro? What's the migration path look like?
Actually, both, and that is one of our newest additions to our product roadmap. And the target architecture has to be the same. I mean, nowadays we take most of our customers to the cloud, right? So we have an Angular front end and typically a C# back end.
Great, super. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I think we can give people back a few minutes of their day. And
right. Will maybe you can go to the next slide just to finalize, which is, the slide that contains some resources. I just want it to be in the recording so that if people replay this webinar, they can also get access to a lot of the resources that are available from the Mobilize side. And also I would like to thank you, Steve, very much for your time in putting this together and in your willingness to share your experience. I think this was super valuable for me and hopefully also for the attendees to this webinar.
Oh, yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No. Yeah, I second that. And just a little bit of housekeeping. We will send a link to the recording out to all the people that registered, and we welcome you to share it. If you have questions for any of the presenters, the contact info should be on here. If you can't get through to somebody or you have any general questions, you can always just direct your question to me. I'm always happy to talk to you about it, almost anything. So thanks everyone for coming. I hope that you got some value out of this. I know I did. Once again, I'd like to thank Steve for spending his valuable time to help explain how they've done this to other people in state and local government. And with that, I think we can sign off. So,
and of course, thank you to Microsoft for helping us.
Yes, thanks, Anand, and the team at Microsoft too.
And Anand, we will continue to do lots of projects together, and I'm sure some new projects will also come out of
definitely.
And one last thank you to our den mother, Sarah from Progress Software, who made this Teams meeting possible.
Thank you.